please find and read example 2C, Beckett Inc., and we're going to use Beckett Inc. as our example to talk about cost, volume, profit analysis, contribution format income statements, and all the various tools and techniques that we can do with CVP analysis and contribution format income statements. I think this is one of the most powerful tools that a manager can have to understand profitability. So the facts are given. We manufacture a single product and we sell the product for $200 per unit. The variable cost is $80 per unit. Now that would include the variable cost of manufacturing and any non-manufacturing variable costs such as sales commissions or shipping, things like that. The company's fixed costs are $900,000 per year. And again, notice we don't make a distinction between what we would consider product cost or period cost, manufacturing cost, or selling and admin. When we're looking at CVP analysis, those distinctions, product and period cost, are not important. What is important is the distinction between variable cost and fixed cost. So this company has done all of its mixed cost analysis and its fixed and variable cost analysis, and so their best estimate is that each unit has a variable cost of $80 per unit and total fixed costs are $900,000 per year. Currently, we sell 8,500 units per year. We're going to treat each of these questions sort of independently. First question, or first requirement, prepare a contribution format income statement at Beckett's current level of sales. A contribution format income statement is an income statement that separates expenses or costs by cost behavior. So we're going to separate our costs between variable and fixed. And instead of a gross margin, we have what we call contribution margin, which makes it clear that what has been subtracted from sales is not cost of goods sold, but rather variable costs. And then our second set of costs is our fixed cost, and after we subtract our fixed costs from contribution margin, we have net operating income. So that's the format, or those are the rows or the lines of a contribution format income statement. Our columns, I find it helpful, and I would recommend as you're learning this, I'd recommend to do this for all of the problems that you're working with, just so you have all the data you have available. I'd recommend using these columns. First of all, a dollars per unit column. So for our variable items, the items whose total varies based on number of units, which would be revenue, variable cost, and therefore contribution margin, we have our dollars per unit. I would then include a number of units column, so we can have our number of units in there, and then our total dollars column, and that is of course going to be dollars per unit times number of units. And our final column is going to be percent of sales, and this is where we are going to include things like our contribution margin ratio and our variable cost ratio if we want to include that. So let's take the data we've got and drop it in here. So what do we know? We know that our selling price per unit is $200 and our variable cost per unit is $80. Therefore, our contribution margin is going to be the difference between those two, or $120. We also know that currently we're selling 8,500 units per year. And what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to set the number of units for the variable cost column equal to cell C5, which is the number of units, the variable cost row, set it equal to the number of units in the sales revenue row. And I'm going to do the same thing for contribution margin, so that if we were to change the number of units being sold, the number of units for everything else would stay the same. So I'm going to set those all the same. Now our total is simply going to be the dollars per unit times number of units. All right, and so we've got sales revenue, variable cost, and contribution per unit, and we've got those in total. And finally, we're going to have our percent of sales. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each item and divide it by sales. Now, of course, you can do this on a per unit basis, or you can do it on a total basis, it doesn't matter. You will get the same number. I'm going to go ahead and put the per unit, or have it keyed to the per unit column, because we may do something later with the total column, and I want to make sure that my percent of sales stays there. And actually go ahead and make this that divided by that. Okay, so here's what we have. For all of our variable items, we've got our dollars per unit, we've got the total number of units, we've got the total dollars involved, and we've got our percent of sales column. So the 60% would be our CM ratio, 40%, if we want to put a label on it, would be variable cost ratio. And sales is always going to be 100% of itself, sort of by definition. Now fixed cost, we're told our fixed costs are $900,000 per year, so we'll go ahead and put in 900,000. And then net operating income is going to be the difference between contribution margin and fixed costs. We're going to subtract fixed cost from contribution margin. Now notice we don't have anything in some of these cells in our contribution format income statement. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put an NA, or not applicable, in some of these cells, the empty ones. And part of why I'm doing that is because the natural human tendency when we're seeing something like this is to fill stuff in everywhere. So I'm kind of giving myself permission to fill those cells in, but I'm making sure that I don't fill them in with anything that's harmful to my analysis. We don't want to think about fixed costs or net operating income on a per unit basis. Neither of these things really occur per unit. Fixed costs certainly don't occur per unit. That's what makes them fixed. And net operating income, because it is contribution margin, which is per unit, minus fixed cost, which is not, we've got sort of a meaningless number if we want to think about net operating income per unit. Think about it this way. The more units we sell, the higher our net operating income per unit will be. The fewer units we sell, the less our net operating income per unit will be, to the point where we can have a break even, so we have zero net income per unit, or if we are losing money, our net income per unit will be negative. So this number, net operating income per unit, is not constant, so we don't want to rely on that number. Similarly, we don't want to rely on our percent of sales as a number, because again, that number is not constant as sales increase or decrease. The whole purpose of cost, volume, profit analysis is to see how changes in volume affect our costs and our profits. And we don't want to put tools in here that won't help us use the tool properly. Now, you may remember from a financial analysis class or a financial accounting class that it is pretty common when you're showing a set of financial statements to put a net income as a percent of sales, sort of a net profit margin percentage or net profit margin ratio. That's appropriate when we're describing what happened in the past or comparing two different companies to each other. It's entirely fine, and I've got no problem with it. But again, it's not something that we want to rely on when we're making plans for the future, because as revenue or sales volume increases, this number is going to change. So it's not something reliable where we can say no matter what volume is, income is a certain percentage of sales. So I'm going to leave all these items where per unit numbers or number of units are not appropriate. I'm going to leave those as NA, so I'm not tempted to put numbers in there that will harm my attempts to do analysis. So that's requirement 1. Prepare a contribution format income statement at Beckett's current level of sales.